There are stories that do not begin with the light of dawn, but with a dark obsession. On the scorching desert of New Mexico, in a silence so heavy that one could hear his own heartbeat, a man on horseback happened to catch a faint groan, a sound like the final breath of a soul left behind. As he followed the sound, a nightmarish scene unfolded before his eyes. A young woman hung from a tree, her body covered in wounds, her eyes half conscious. Right above her head, a wooden sign bore a message written in blood red: "White man do not forgive." In that moment, he did not just stumble upon a human being on the edge of death, but also into a secret that could burn his life to ashes. If you want to follow this dangerous story of love and survival to the very end, make sure to hit subscribe, like, and share to support the channel. In the scorching noon of New Mexico's frontier, Ethan Cross let his horse walk slowly over the cracked earth. Every step of the old horse stirred up a thin layer of dust that hung in the air like smoke before fading into the silence. He had spent half a day tracking a stray deer, but the trail had softened and disappeared into sand and rock. Ethan did not really mind. He liked this solitude. No voices, no gossip, only the wind whistling through thorny shrubs and the cry of a hawk echoing from afar. That was the rare kind of peace he still believed in. Then a strange sound broke into the silence, so faint that at first he thought it was only the wind. Ethan pulled his horse to a halt, tilting his head slightly. Again the sound returned, a hoarse, weak moan, like breath struggling to remember how to draw air. His heartbeat slowed, his eyes narrowing on the low brush and jagged rocks ahead. Ethan tied the reins to a dead branch, the rifle still slung across his back. He pushed his way through scraggly junipers, stepped over a few stones, and suddenly stopped. Before him opened a small clearing, encircled by old cottonwood trees, and there, beneath the largest one, he saw her. A young woman, hanging by her wrists, her arms stretched high, her body limp, her feet barely brushing the ground. Her sunburned skin was caked with dust, her long black hair matted with blood and sweat. Her chest rose and fell unsteadily, fragile as a thread, but she was still alive. Ethan's gaze lifted. On the trunk above her, a rough wooden sign was nailed with rusty spikes. Letters scrawled in bright red paint, or perhaps blood, screamed, "White man don't forgive." A chill ran down his spine. Ethan instinctively stepped back, bile rising in his throat. It was not just a warning. It was a sentence, a curse, a mark that this place had witnessed a hatred he had once tried to bury. He glanced around. Only the wind stirring dry leaves, whispering like the voices of the dead. No figure in sight, yet the silence pressed down as though someone was still watching. Ethan's hand tightened on the handle of the knife at his side. He muttered a curse under his breath. "Damn it! What the hell did they do to you?" The girl stirred faintly. Her head sagged, revealing wrists swollen and bleeding where the rope bit deep. Ethan swallowed hard. "Can you hear me, girl?" His voice came out rough. No answer. He stepped closer, whispering, almost to calm himself, "I am not here to hurt you." Now her face was clear in the harsh sunlight. Young, not yet 20, her cheeks hollowed by thirst, a broad forehead and a strong jawline. Blood dried at the corner of her lips. Ethan touched the rope. It was made of twisted agave fibers, rough and unyielding, designed not only to hang but to torment. He drew his knife. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but because the sign above her seemed to rub salt into an old, invisible wound inside him. It accused, it condemned, it made him hesitate as if he were the guilty one. Then a faint moan slipped from her throat, weak but enough to shatter all doubt. Ethan muttered, "No, I am not like them." The blade cut through with one swift stroke. The rope snapped. The girl collapsed forward. Ethan caught her, holding her in his arms. Her body burned with fever, so light it felt as though her bones had melted away. Her eyes cracked open, black yet clouded, swimming with fear. He knelt in the dust, gently laying her against his thigh. From his canteen, he poured a few drops of water onto a cloth and pressed it to her cracked, "Easy now. You are safe, at least for this moment." She blinked but said nothing, only lifted a trembling hand to clutch at his sleeve. Ethan looked up at the sign again, then back at her. He pulled off his coat and draped it across her shoulders. "Do you have a name?" he asked softly. No reply. He whispered to himself, "Then I will call you Marisol." And with that, he rose to his feet, lifting her carefully as though she were something fragile. But now you are coming with me. So Ethan Cross turned back into the wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death and a secret heavy enough to bury a man's life forever. The sun was sinking toward the west when Ethan Cross returned to his small ranch, a barren, humble piece of land clinging to the edge of the desert, where people often said that only stone and blood never truly disappeared. The wind turned the rickety windmill, its groans like the lament of a weary soul. The horse stable sagged, resembling an old man bowing under grief. The main house was nothing more than a single room with a tiny loft, its patched tin roof scarred with years of repairs. Yet it stood, steady and unyielding, just like the man who had built it. Ethan helped Marisol down from the horse. Her body burned with fever, her head resting weakly against his chest, her breath fragile as dry leaves skittering across stone. He carried her inside, gently laying her on the simple wooden bed. He carefully slipped his coat off her shoulders, afraid the slightest movement might startle her. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, black, wide, but distant, still watching him. The oil lamp flickered, casting shadows on the wooden walls as Ethan poured water into a tin basin by the bed. Kneeling, he picked up a clean cloth. Her legs were bruised and scraped, one ankle swollen, her wrists raw and bleeding, bearing deep, burned marks where the rope had cut into her flesh. Ethan let out a breath. "I will not harm you," he said softly, as though speaking to the air rather than expecting an answer. "I only want to clean these wounds." He dipped the cloth into warm water, wrung it out gently, and lifted her foot into the basin. She flinched, but did not pull away. Ethan waited. When she did not resist, he began wiping away the dust and blood. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as though he were touching something sacred. Gradually, the water turned the color of rust. They were silent, but it was not an empty silence. It weighed heavy. He avoided her gaze, yet still felt those eyes cutting into him like a suspended blade, uncertain whether it would fall or remain still. After a while, her lips parted, as though to speak, but no sound came. Ethan gave a faint smile, murmuring, "Maybe you are not used to talking much. That is all right. Sometimes silence is worth more than 1,000 words." He cleaned both her feet, wrapped them in soft strips of cloth, and laid them gently upon the folded blanket. "You remind me of a river I once saw," he said, as though telling a story to himself. In the dry season, its bed was bare, lifeless, but the moment rain fell, it surged wild again. They called it Quiet Snake. I never knew why. It was simply quiet. The lamplight brushed her high cheekbones, her cracked yet full lips, her long lashes dusted with sand. She was far too young for such wounds. Yet in her eyes rested something older, something that had learned to endure pain without fleeing from it, only waiting for it to pass. Ethan gave a slight nod. "I will call you Marisol," he whispered. "The name feels like the morning sun, quiet but radiant." She blinked slowly. No refusal, no agreement, only her breath, steady. Ethan stood, his hands still damp, and pulled the blanket over her shoulders. "If you are hungry, I have some beans." Not much, but more than empty air. Still no reply. He stepped back, unrolled his own bedding, and dragged it near the door. That night he would sleep in the barn. For in his heart he knew, a woman who had just stepped out of hell should not have to bear the watchful eyes of a stranger, especially one carrying so much blood and shadow on his shoulders. Before leaving, Ethan glanced back once more. She had turned slightly, her eyes closed, her lips no longer trembling. The basin by the bed was stained red, still bearing witness to what she had endured. He carried it outside, poured it onto the ground, and watched the water sink into the thirsty sand. Inside, Marisol drifted into dreams. Dreams filled with fire, with panicked horses, with ropes pulled tight against the sky, and with a rough yet gentle hand washing away the pain without asking for anything in return. The days that followed passed as slowly as the desert's breath. Yet inside the small wooden house, the air had changed. Silence was no longer a mere shell of peace, but thick, heavy, pressing with an unseen weight. Marisol, the name Ethan had given her, would take a little food when he offered it, but never much. She moved quietly, each step cautious, her body always poised as if ready to flee. Her eyes stayed sharp and alert, her posture tense like a wild animal caged for too long. Not a single word escaped her lips, but Ethan often caught her gaze on him for a fleeting moment, only for her to look away the instant he turned back. At night, Ethan left her the small bed, while he himself lay outside in the barn, rifle by his side. He told himself he did it to give her space. But the truth was more complicated. He was afraid, not of the young woman, but of what her presence signaled. For the image of that wooden sign, etched in red letters, still burned in his mind. White man, don't forgive. A warning, a sentence hanging overhead. On the third morning, before the sun had risen high, Ethan found the first sign. A footprint pressed into the hard earth before the barn, smaller than his own, fresher, leading straight toward the house. He crouched, tracing the deep groove of the heel with his finger. Military boots, cavalry. The mark was fresh, no more than a few hours old. He rose slowly, scanning the ridge in the distance, only the gray shimmer of sagebrush and waves of rising heat. No figure in sight, but he knew they were near. When he stepped back inside, Marisol sat by the window, motionless. At the sound of his boots, her body tensed. "Did you see anyone?" Ethan asked evenly. She gave no answer, only drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Ethan nodded once, muttering more to himself than to her. "We have company." That evening, he kept the oil lamp burning low, sitting on the porch with his rifle resting across his thighs. The wind had died, leaving the air still as a sprung trap. Wolves howled in the distance, while the stars came out one by one, glittering like spirits waking from sleep. Inside, he heard Marisol's footsteps pacing in small circles around the room. By midday the next day, the first man revealed himself. A rider approached from the east, dust billowing behind the hooves of a chestnut horse. He wore the blue and yellow uniform of the U.S. Cavalry, a pistol at his side, hat pulled low to shadow his bearded face. Ethan stepped down from the porch, one hand resting loosely at his belt. The soldier reined in his horse, peering down. "Are you Cross?" "Depends who is asking. Lieutenant Miller out of Dust Hollow. We are hunting a fugitive." He pulled a paper from his coat and tossed it down. "Have you seen this one?" Ethan picked it up. He already knew what it would be. Sure enough, the sketch was crude but clear enough. A young Apache woman, eyes sharp as blades, long black hair. At the bottom, wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward $50. Ethan lifted his gaze slowly. "No, never seen her." "You are sure?" Miller pressed, leaning down closer. "She is small, quiet, might be injured, might be hiding. There is word someone pulled her out near Cottonwood Flats." Ethan held the paper a moment longer, then folded it and handed it back. "All I have seen around here are jackrabbits and a stubborn cow." Miller's eyes narrowed. "She is not just a runaway Cross. She is part of a rebel band, savages, and that sign they left on the tree, they meant every word of it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He said quietly, "If I see her, I will send word." The soldier studied him for a long moment before nodding, wheeling his horse around. "See that you do." Ethan stood motionless until the dust cloud faded into the horizon. Inside the house, behind the curtain, Marisol had heard every word, her eyes fixed on him, unblinking. Ethan stepped in, removed his hat, and leaned against the doorframe. "They came asking, showed me the wanted notice, said you were accused of murder." She gave no answer. I told them no. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering sharp. "I do not know what you did, Marisol. Maybe one day you will tell me. But out here, people must choose, and I have made mine." He turned away, pretending to stir the pot of beans he had set on the stove. Behind him, she shifted slightly, a breath catching in her throat. And in that fragile moment, the silence in the room cracked, just enough to let in the smallest thread of trust. That afternoon, the sun hung low, stretching long shadows across the yard. The desert wind blew softer than usual, yet the silence that settled over the land felt different, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat on the porch, knife in hand, drawing slow strokes across a whetstone. The faint scrape of steel against stone ticked in rhythm, steady as a clock, echoing in the vast emptiness. He focused on that rhythm, forcing his thoughts away from the house, where Marisol still rested. Then suddenly, another sound intruded, the crunch of gravel under bare feet. Not a horse, not a wolf. Lighter, closer. Ethan looked up. Marisol was stepping outside. For the first time since he had saved her, she crossed the threshold on her own. Her bare feet touched the earth with hesitation, as though testing whether the ground still accepted her. Draped across her shoulders was the coarse wool blanket he had left at the foot of her bed, trailing almost to her heels like a new skin. She moved slowly, her steps uneven but determined, heading toward the barn. Ethan set the knife aside but did not rise. He only watched. In the glow of the setting sun, she looked small, fragile, yet there was something different in the way she walked. Not fleeing, reclaiming. At the patch of bare earth beside the barn, where the wind had swept away the leaves, Marisol lowered herself to her knees. She let the blanket slip down her arms, picked up a dry branch, and began to trace lines into the dust. Ethan stood, walked closer, but kept a few steps between them. In the sand, the image took shape, a bird with wings outstretched, soaring, but encircled by flames like a burning crown. The strokes were sharp, fierce. The bird seemed alive, in pain, its wings at once resisting the fire and rising with it. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice low and steady. "What is it?" Marisol did not look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the drawing, her face calm but her shoulders taut. For a long time she said nothing, as if weighing whether to open the door and let memory spill out. At last her voice broke through, hoarse as gravel in the wind. "Bird in fire, the sign of my people." Ethan kept silent, his eyes on the figure in the dust. Marisol touched the heart of the bird with the stick. "The symbol of my father, of my family. We painted it on our lodges, carved it into wood. Always flying, always carrying fire." Her shoulders trembled, her jaw clenched. She fought the tide of pain crashing back. Then they came, soldiers, bluecoats, last spring. They said our tribe must move to a dry land, with no food, no water. They said we were dangerous. The stick quivered in her grip. "We said no, we stayed, we fought." Her voice broke. "They burned, they killed my mother, my two brothers. The elders burned alive in their lodges." Ethan's fist closed tight. Something old, fierce, surged inside him. Something he had tried to bury. Marisol went on. "I ran. I hid. But they found me. They beat me, tied me, called me a gun thief. I was not. I did not." Then, for the first time, she lifted her gaze to his. Her voice was a storm. "I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong." Her words cracked across the desert air like thunder. Ethan did not answer at once. After a long moment he spoke, his tone quiet but firm. "I believe you." Marisol turned back to the burning bird, dropped the stick. Her hands fell limp in her lap. Her shoulders shook, at first silently, then broke into raw, ragged sobs. She curled in on herself, clutching her knees, her hair falling like a curtain. The pain was too much for such a small frame, bursting out in waves. Ethan sat beside her, neither touching nor speaking. He placed his hand on the ground beside the bird in the dust, spreading his fingers wide. It was not comfort, it was witness. Marisol felt it. Slowly her sobs faded, her breathing steadied. She lifted her face, streaked with tears and dirt. Their eyes met, bare, unguarded. "You may call me Marisol," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice rough as wind through stone. "All right, Marisol it is." They sat together in silence as the sun sank behind the mountains. The bird in flames faded with the dusk, but its ashes, like the truth, remained. That night, the wind whistled softly through the roof like ghosts whispering their names. Ethan sat by the stove, stirring a pot of beans, while Marisol stood at the window, arms wrapped tight around herself, eyes fixed on the night. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer a wall. It was a shared breath. Suddenly she turned. Her voice was small but clear. "Do you want to know the truth?" Ethan looked up, the spoon halting midair. He only nodded, without pressing. She stepped slowly to the table, sat across from him. "My father was a minor chief. Our tribe was small, living in peace. We traded with settlers, even learned their faith. We had laws, boundaries. We only wanted to live." Ethan listened, face unreadable, but his eyes locked on hers. "The winter before, a white woman was found dead near our hunting grounds. Her throat was cut. Her husband claimed we did it, but we did not. Everyone knew he killed her, but they needed someone to blame." Marisol bit down on her lip. "So the soldiers came. Not just soldiers, cattlemen, townsfolk. They said they were bringing justice." Her voice cracked. "They burned the camp, killed my brothers as they slept. My mother died with her rosary still in her hand. My father was hanged from the council post." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I hid in a hollow tree. They dragged me out. I had a knife, but they took it. They said I was dangerous, that I wanted revenge. They beat me, bound me, and hung me on the tree where you found me." Her eyes locked on his, as bait for anyone left alive who still carried hate. "And why?" Ethan's voice was gravel. "Why was it me who cut you down?" She countered with a question, eyes never leaving him. He was silent for a long time, then said, "Because I failed to save someone else." Marisol frowned. "My family," Ethan said, his tone flat as stone. "Last spring, our camp was attacked. They said it was Apache. Maybe it was, maybe not. When I returned, there was only ash. My sister was 16. I heard her crying in the barn. But I was afraid. I did not go in. I waited for others. She died before they came." The silence that followed was heavy, not empty. "Lidden," Marisol whispered, "you saved me because you could not save her." He nodded. She studied him for a long time, then asked, "If I had been white, would you still have cut me down?" Ethan rose, circling the table slowly. He stopped before her. Marisol looked up, searching his rough features for an answer. He reached out, lifting her chin with a calloused but gentle hand. "I do not love a color," he said. "I love what breathes beneath it." Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She laid her hand over his, pressing her cheek into his palm. And then, as if both of them surrendered to an instinct too old to resist, they leaned closer. The kiss came quietly, tentative at first, then deepening, like two souls who had held their breath too long and finally remembered how to breathe. Her hand trembled against his chest, his arms closed firmly around her back. Behind them, the fire crackled, bearing witness to a beginning. Not every battle is fought on a battlefield. Sometimes it begins the moment you decide to hold a hand and never let it go. That morning the air felt different. No wind, no insects, only a dense silence as though the land itself was waiting. Ethan Cross had risen early, quietly packing hardtack, smoked meat, and a canteen of water into his saddlebag. From the horizon, a thin column of smoke rose steadily. Not a campfire, a signal of many. Word had spread. The hunters had begun their chase. Their time was gone. Marisol stood by the fence, her hair braided, wearing his oversized coat. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a fire of unease. Ethan tightened the last strap of the saddle, pulled the leather taut, and looked up. "We must leave. Tonight." She nodded as though the answer had long been ready. He spoke slowly, as if etching each word deep. "South, past the border, into the Sierra Madre Mountains. They say the Apaches still live free there. No soldiers, no gallows." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "If we ride hard, we can make it." Marisol stepped closer, so near her breath touched his chest. Her small hand gripped his calloused one. Ethan lowered his head, asking like a plea, "You will come with me?" She pressed her forehead to his chest, her voice trembling yet firm. "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." Ethan closed his eyes. That one sentence weighed more than any oath. He bent and kissed her tangled black hair, as though inhaling the single thread still binding him to this world. At dusk, they mounted. The ranch lay silent behind them. No note, no farewell fire, no parting words. Only a door swinging softly, a home slipping into the past. They crossed the desert beneath a sky crowded with stars. The moon poured silver across the mountains, casting a ghostly light on the barren land. Marisol leaned low over her horse, steady in her movements, asking nothing about the road ahead. She only followed, each hoofbeat echoing her heartbeat. With about 10 miles left to the border, the ground opened into low ridges, dotted with sparse brush. Ethan's eyes swept the horizon, every shadow etched against stone like a threat. A sharp knot twisted in his gut, a warning. Then it came. A gunshot cracked. The sound tore through the night, bouncing off the cliffs. Ethan jerked, thrown hard from the saddle, his body slamming against the ground. "Ethan!" Marisol screamed, leaping from her horse. He clutched his side, blood seeping dark across his shirt. "Go on," he rasped, his voice breaking. "No." Another shot whined past, sparking off the rock behind them. From the ridge, 2 riders emerged, guns drawn, eyes glinting cold beneath the moon. Ethan groaned, struggling to rise. "We must move." Marisol pulled his arm across her shoulders, dragging him upright. His blood poured heavier, but he gritted his teeth, forcing one step after another. "Trust me, I am not dead yet." Bullets hissed through the night. Marisol bore his weight, her slight frame braced with unyielding strength. Together they staggered toward a narrow cleft in the rocks, where the walls pressed close enough for only a man to pass. Shots sparked against stone, but they pressed on. Ethan stumbled, his breath wet with blood, vision blurring, yet his will stayed iron. At last they slipped into the rocky throat. The gunfire ceased. The riders would not dare follow where speed and horses meant nothing. In the heavy dark, Ethan collapsed, his knees sinking into the sand, blood flowing in a dark stream. He lifted his face to her, eyes burning strangely bright through the pain. "You said you wanted to be my wife." Marisol dropped to her knees, cradling his face in her trembling hands. "I meant it." A faint smile tugged at his lips, even as agony seared him. "Then we must live through this." She nodded fiercely, tears gleaming in the moonlight. And for the first time since she had met Ethan, Marisol prayed. Not to the God of the settlers, but to the wind, to the fire, to the surviving spirits of her ancestors. Because love in this land was never free. It was always a gamble. And tonight, they had wagered everything. That night, the canyon held them like a dark cocoon. Outside, the wind howled, and the distant echo of hooves faded into the night. Inside, there was only Ethan's labored breathing, heavy and wet with blood. Marisol dragged him almost step by step until she found a small stream trickling through the gorge. There, she pitched a rough shelter with canvas and laid him down on folded blankets. Moonlight slipped through the flap, weaving silver threads across his face. His breath was slow, but steady. Marisol knelt beside him, basin of cool water in hand, gently washing the wound, wiping sweat from his brow. Ethan's eyes cracked open, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Are you always this strict with your patients?" Her brow arched, but her mouth curved faintly. "Only with men too stubborn to die." He chuckled softly, then winced at the pull of the stitches. She pressed a hand against his chest quickly, whispering, "Be still." The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was thick but warm, like a blanket wrapping around two souls who had already lost too much. After a while, Ethan spoke quietly. "Tell me something true. What is your real name?" Marisol looked down, hesitated. Then she took his hand and placed it over her chest, above her heart. "Ayanna," she whispered. "My father gave it to me. It means peaceful river." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as though letting the name seep into his blood. When he opened them again, the wariness had not vanished, but something rare and warm glowed behind it. "Ayanna," he repeated, like a prayer. "You are the only peace I have ever known." This time, Ayanna did not cry. She only tightened her grip on his hand. Time passed. Months later, at the far southern edge of the territory, where the border melted into thorn forests and the dry wind carried the scent of resin, a small home rose by the bend of a river. Built of timber and animal hide, it was humble but steady, hidden among reeds and wildflowers. Under the porch, Ayanna sat cross-legged, needle in hand, each stitch falling steady on a tiny white infant's shirt. Her belly had grown round beneath her sash. Softly, she hummed an old melody, her fingers calm, unhurried, strong. In the yard, Ethan was breaking a young horse. His voice was deep and steady, repeating short commands. Each time he lifted his eyes toward the porch and saw her silhouette behind the thin curtain, his gaze brightened. And each time a quiet smile touched his lips. Inside the house, there were no trophies, no paintings. Only a few bundles of drying herbs, 2 worn books, and a half-finished baby blanket. Ayanna moved through that space like the very breath of the home itself, quiet yet full of life. One afternoon, she walked the familiar path to the river. The water moved slowly, steadily, catching the glow of the setting sun. She stepped barefoot into the shallows, letting the cool stream caress her skin, her hands resting gently on her belly. "Child," she whispered, "your father did more than forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Footsteps sounded behind her. Ethan approached in silence. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing, no words needed. Together they stood, watching the river flow beneath the blazing red sky, where the first stars began to flicker awake. No one would have thought 2 hunted souls could ever find such an ending. Yet amid a world scarred by storms and wounds, they had carved out a small patch of earth where love could take root. Not a love written in history books, but one that endured in every breath, in every drop of water. The river kept flowing, gentle and sure, like her name, like their life, like a final home that truly belonged to them. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share to follow the journeys ahead.